the year is 2014 and the LA Auto Show is taking place, the Toyota Mirai is being announced. It's one of the first production hydrogen vehicles to be announced and eventually released to the public. Had the potential to change personal transportation forever, but why hasn't it? In a lot of ways, hydrogen seems like the perfect fuel. Oxygen in the atmosphere combines with hydrogen in a fuel cell to produce electrons that power an electric motor, and the only waste product is water. A lot of people don't know this, but hydrogen vehicles are actually electric vehicles, just instead of using a battery like we traditionally think of in an EV, it uses a hydrogen fuel cell to produce that electricity. And because they use hydrogen instead of a big battery, they can be filled up in about 5 minutes, just like a gas car. While this may seem like a perfect alternative to gas with quick fill-up times and the only emissions being water, there's actually a lot wrong with hydrogen as a fuel source. And I'm not going to talk about all of those today because that would take forever and I would probably bore you to death. So I've boiled it down to 3 main reasons why hydrogen is not a good idea as a fuel source. And those are cost, lack of infrastructure, and inefficiencies. So let's look at cost first. On average, it costs about $13.99 per kilogram of hydrogen to fuel your car. And this translates to about 21 cents per mile. And if you remember from my EV Miss video about the cost of electric vehicles, they only cost about 6 cents per mile, with gasoline vehicles averaging around 12 cents per mile. So that is a no-brainer there. You don't want to spend 21 cents per mile to fuel your car when a gas car is cheaper and an electric car is cheaper. Now, to kind of offset that, hydrogen vehicle manufacturers are including hydrogen with the purchase of the vehicle for around 3 years. That kind of seems like the standard length of time that they'll provide fuel, but that won't be around forever, and people are eventually going to want to profit off of hydrogen sales. And this high cost is largely in part to how we produce hydrogen. It's not a naturally occurring element in our atmosphere, so it's not something we can just pull right out of the air. And this kind of brings me to my second point, which is the lack of infrastructure. And because it's not naturally occurring, there are 2 main ways we actually produce hydrogen, and those are electrolysis and steam reforming. On a very high level, electrolysis is basically when you apply an electric current through water, and you can actually separate out the hydrogen and the oxygen. This can actually be done using renewable energy sources, but it is still not very efficient and not very cost effective. And because electrolysis is not very cost effective, people typically create hydrogen with a method called steam reforming. And this is when you combine methane, which is a greenhouse gas, with very high pressure steam to create hydrogen and carbon monoxide, another greenhouse gas. So not exactly a green option here. So unless there is a place to create hydrogen on site, either by steam reforming or electrolysis, this hydrogen is compressed and shipped into these stations, and that is typically done on trucks, which also burns fossil fuels. So all along the way, you're wasting energy that could have been going right into the car. And because very few people are using hydrogen vehicles or even use hydrogen at all, there's very few of these production facilities and hydrogen fueling stations. And that kind of gets me back to my point of the lack of infrastructure. If you want to buy one of these vehicles, your options are pretty limited to just the West Coast, and even then, there's less than 100 stations in operation right now. So those quick refuel times might not help you if there is nowhere to refuel. And by this point, you're probably thinking, well, Alex, there weren't electric vehicle charging stations when electric cars started coming on the market, and we got over that completely fine. So why can't hydrogen do the same thing? Well, electric cars kind of had a luxury. They could tap into the existing grid, which is everywhere. Anywhere that there is electricity, you could build a charging station theoretically. Whereas hydrogen doesn't really have that luxury. They have to build a completely new station to either produce or hold the hydrogen and be able to fuel cars that are coming through. And if we move more towards hydrogen, I think we're almost kind of moving back in time to a more gas car model where we're shipping the fuel in. I mean, you don't want a gas refining facility right next to where you're trying to fill up your car. That just doesn't seem safe at all. And because of that, we're stuck with hauling in all of the gas on trucks to the gas stations to then fill up the tanks there that will then fill up car tanks. So I think just kind of building up that whole infrastructure is a lot to overcome for a brand new fuel source, and something we haven't been doing for a while. And while there are lots of inefficiencies in the whole infrastructure of actually moving hydrogen from being contained in water to actually powering a hydrogen fuel cell, there's lots of inefficiencies in the actual cars as well. And that kind of brings me to my third point, which is the inefficiencies of the car itself. So because hydrogen cars are electric, but they don't have a battery, all of that hydrogen in the fuel cell actually needs to be converted back into electricity to move the car. And anytime energy changes forms like that, energy is lost that could be powering the motor and moving the car. So to just recap the typical hydrogen life cycle, it starts with a process called steam reforming, which uses a ton of greenhouse gases to produce hydrogen. It's then compressed, put on trucks, and it's shipped out to the under 100 stations on the West Coast. It's then ready to be fueled into the car. It's pumped in. It's then put into the fuel cell. The fuel cell then has to change that hydrogen back from hydrogen into electricity to then power the electric motor. And in my opinion, that's a lot of steps just to power a car. A typical battery-powered EV, on the other hand, doesn't have to go through all that, and it basically uses electricity throughout the whole process. The only losses that occur are when it changes from AC power to DC power, and those losses are very minimal in my opinion compared to how much hydrogen has to go through. So after researching hydrogen vehicles, I really don't think they're ever going to outsell or outcompete EVs in this day and age. The inefficiencies and just the whole process, I think, has a lot of hurdles to overcome that EVs don't have to deal with. So I'm really not buying hydrogen as the fuel of the future, but who knows, people said the same thing about battery electric cars. Thanks for watching. If you disagree with me, then definitely leave a comment below explaining what I screwed up or what things were inaccurate. Anything like that I want to hear about. Or if you do agree with me, tell me why, what things do you agree with, and what other hurdles you might know of that hydrogen needs to overcome. Also, if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit that like button. That helps this channel out a ton, gets these videos out to more people, and helps educate more people about electric cars and alternative fuel source vehicles. And as always, definitely hit that subscribe button. I come out with new videos every single week, so make sure you subscribe and you catch those. I'll see you in the next one.